Для римского мира Британия была неизвестной и загадочной землей, находящейся за морем, в то время, когда Юлий Цезарь вторгся в Британию в 55 и 54 году до нашей эры. Несмотря на поражение британцев, Цезарь вскоре заключил мир со своими противниками и вернулся в Галлию. В течение почти 100 лет после этого Британия сохраняла свою независимость. Но когда к власти пришел император Клавдий, нуждавшийся в повышении своего престижа, он в 43 году начал полномасштабное вторжение, намереваясь сменить режим и добиться военной славы.
So the Romans invaded in AD 43. It was under Emperor Claudius, and they firstly rode up the River Thames, and they had sort of flat-bottomed boats, so they weren't very deep keel, and they got as far as where we have the City of London today. In those times, the River Thames was a lot wider. In fact, where we are now, the River Thames, the Abbey Wood, would be about sometimes a mile wide, and but there weren't any sort of walls containing it, and so it was a lot shallower because of that. And but it was on the high tide. That's as far as the boats could get on the high tides, bringing them upriver, you know. And so that's why they built a sort of a trading base there for trading, and also there's a bridge built across the river. The first London Bridge, that was built in AD 52, and you'll still find the wooden staves in on the banks either side at low tide. It's like wooden spikes, the remains of the bridge. If you look, they're there from actually Roman times. But in Magnus and Martyr Church, on the north side, where the previous bridge used to be, running next to that church, there's actually a model of what it used to look like, made of wood in fact, which is worthwhile having a look at. Their idea was to really sort of take over areas which could provide agricultural production, like Kent.
На этот раз римляне быстро добились военного успеха, но постепенное продвижение через Южную Англию и Уэльс было остановлено в 60 году восстанием Боудики, королевы Эценов в Восточной Англии, разгневанной жестокостью завоевания. Восстание было подавлено, но до этого 3 недавно основанных римских города – Коломадун, современный Колчестер, Веруламиум, современный Сент-Олбанс, и Лондиниум, современный Лондон, были сожжены дотла. Наступление возобновилось в 70 году нашей эры с завоеванием Уэльса и севера. Губернатору Агриколе, который правил с 77 по 83 года, даже удалось победить шотландские племена в битве при Монсе-Граупиусе в 83 году нашей эры.
The army of the province consisted, from the time of Hadrian onward, of 3 legions, the 2nd at Carlion, the 6th at York, and the 20th at Chester, for a total of approximately 15,000 heavy infantry. In addition, there was a large but uncertain number of auxiliary troops of the second grade, organized as infantry or cavalry, each 500 or 1,000 strong, and posted in castella, or small forts nearer the frontier than the legions. The legionary fortresses were large rectangular enclosures of 50 or 60 acres surrounded by strong walls. Traces of these can still be seen in the north and east town walls of Chester, at the eastern and western angles of York, and on the south side of Carlion. The auxiliary castella were likewise square or oblong in shape, but varied from 3 to 6 acres according to the size of the regime and the need for stabling. Of these, about 100 are known.
Оставшиеся в Британии 3 легиона, армейские подразделения численностью до 6000 человек, обосновались на постоянных базах. Вспомогательные войска были разбросаны в небольших фортах, в основном по всей Северной Англии и вдоль вала Адриана. В умиротворенных частях провинции города были основаны столицы для каждой из племенных областей, в которых жили бриты. Была развита сеть дорог, и земледельцы на юге начали строить виллы в римском стиле.
Behind the formidable garrison, sheltered from barbarians and in easy contact with the Roman Empire, stretched the lowlands of southern and eastern Britain. Their Roman culture spread. In the lands looking onto the Thames estuary, Kent, Essex, Middle Essex, the process had perhaps begun before the Roman conquest. It was continued after the event, and in two ways. To some extent it was encouraged by the Roman government, which founded towns settled with Roman citizens, generally discharged legionnaires, and endowed them with franchise and constitution like those of Italian municipalities. It developed still more by its own volition. The coherent civilization of the Romans was accepted by the British tribal notables, and it was by the Galas with something like enthusiasm.
При римлянах было основано множество городов, колоний и фортов. В некоторых случаях, когда римляне оставляли место назначения на зиму или лето, его занимали коренные жители. Выбор места определялся контуром холмов, наличием путей или близостью к морю или рекам. Во II веке Клавдием Птоломеем было перечислено 56 римских городов. Они формировали центры римской власти, права, торговли и цивилизации, а также языка и литературы. Среди прочего, свободные жители Ибаракума и Веруламиума пользовались правами римского гражданства.
Big towns that you tend to find the remains of are modelled really on like your Roman towns that you would see in Italy. So they would have a place like the Forum, but smaller, for the business affairs of the day to be sorted out. They would certainly have a bathhouse that would have public toilets and baths, so they would go. So it was almost like they were trying to make Britain into Rome. And in certain places it worked. So if you go to the Fishbourne Palace, down in the Fishbourne area by Emsworth, beautifully made, a huge palace. Whereas here we just have what we call a Romano-British farmhouse. So the Romans lived here, but they lived alongside these people, okay? So again, like I said, the information we get is mainly what the Romans have written about them. And we always get the school children to stand here and think what it was like for these guys to look out the door and see those little round huts.
Жизнь большинства простых британцев, фермеров в сельской местности, менялась медленно. Однако постепенно они начали строить виллы, города и рынки. На рынках они могли обменивать свою продукцию на товары в римском стиле и увидеть, как люди одеваются и ведут себя по-римски. Рим превратился в империю отчасти из-за того, как он относился к завоеванным местным жителям. Присоединив к империи новую территорию, Рим расширял права гражданства на завоеванных территориях. Римская империя расширялась за счет применения силы. Однако, когда новые люди стали гражданами, они стали римлянами, независимо от того, где они жили. Одним из способов, которым Рим контролировал недавно завоеванное население, Было строительство римских городов по всей империи. Поступая так, они также расширяли римский образ жизни.
Clothing did change throughout the later part of the Iron Age into the Roman period. They tried to be much more Romanized. However, the people in this villa, if you were male and you were originally from the Iron Age, you probably carry on wearing the trousers, the breeches that the Iron Age people were wearing, but only use the toga when you're entertaining, and you'd only use the toga when you've got the haggle course running. The ladies' fashion changed as well, but again, the toga type dress of the Romans would have only been used inside the villa, not out and about. They would have just used very similar to that of the late Iron Age clothing. As we go through the Roman period, those things will change again. So Romans never stayed still. The idea that trade was just male is certainly in the literature is true, but in the archaeology it is questionable. In Britain there seems to be an awful lot of trade in the towns that are by women, although there is no written sources to say one way or the other. So it's very difficult to understand what is actually going on in the Roman society in Britain. We know about the Roman society in Rome quite a bit, and we tend to take our ideas from that, but we don't actually look at the people they were conquering and eventually marrying and having their own children, how those different cultures blended together and how those cultures then changed how people's outlook were.
Римских матерей называли метарфамилиями. Жена часто делилась властью с мужем. Она вела домашнее хозяйство, контролировала финансы и воспитывала детей. Возможно, у нее не было много юридических прав, но она пользовалась огромным уважением и престижем в семье и в обществе. Удивительно, но в древнеримские времена очень немногие дети ходили в школу. Для большинства воспитание детей было в руках семьи. Отец учил своих сыновей практическим жизненным потребностям – чтению, письму, счету и законам. В уроки сына входили как проявление уважения к римским обычаям, традициям, богам и авторитету. Римляне уважали римские законы и традиции и уважали власть имущих, независимо от того, была ли власть воплощена отцовскими семьями или магистратами. Дети учились писать с помощью восковых табличек. Это были тонкие кусочки дерева, покрытые пчелиным воском. Воск был очень мягким, и дети писали на нем бронзовым или деревянным стилусом. Если были допущены какие-то ошибки, плоский конец стилуса мог сгладить воск. В отличие от жены в древних Афинах, римская жена могла покинуть свой дом, чтобы навестить друзей и посетить игры, театр и суд вместе с мужем.
So Roman clothing, yeah, that's a very interesting subject. So both men and women, they were wearing these tunics, but for women it was longer, so almost to their ankle, and men obviously wore shorter tunics, but even the slaves had tunics. So basically everybody could wear a tunic. The kids were also wearing the same type of tunic. They were usually made of cotton, linen, or wool. Men, however, had something called toga. That's probably what you have seen in the movies. Most of the movies, men wearing this very, very long, elaborated, long piece of fabric around them, and that's called toga. they wore it as an official clothing, so if it's more like a business suit nowadays, basically. But there was only men who were allowed to wear toga, and they had to wear it in any official meeting and gathering. Most of them were white, but high-ranked people, emperor, could also wear purple colored toga. The reason for it is purple color was so expensive to make. It was made of some kind of shell, so it was very difficult and expensive process to do, and only high people with a high position could wear that. So women wore something called stola over their tunic if they were married, and stola was basically two pieces of rectangle fabric sewn together and buttoned together. But it was very simple, just over the head, and an opening for head and arms, and it could be held together with a belt, or it was cinched just under the breast. Over this stola, women also wore palla, which is basically a shawl, very long, almost 11 feet, 5 feet in the width shawl. They wrapped themselves around with the palla. Especially if it was cold outside, it would protect them from the wind and bad weather. But also they covered their hair and their face when they went out if they didn't want to be disturbed. They could also wear it over their left shoulder and under their right arm. That's probably the most common way of wearing a palla. Women were also wearing makeup back then. Makeup is mostly made by the oil and stones that they were crushing to powder, and with the oil it became like a cream. The slaves put the makeup on their masters, and the slave who knew how to put the makeup on the master's faces were very high demand. Roman usually wore eyeliner, and eyeshadow was very popular also, and rouge. They also had hair dye, so it was very popular to dye their hair with henna, like red color, and make the hair blonde, like bleaching. But they also wore lots of wigs. They had a very elaborate hair, and their status could be seen in how elaborate the hairstyle. Women were also very fond of jewelries, and there were lots of jewelries. Younger women who were engaged, they got lots of jewelries from their fiance, and they wore their jewelries before they would go out, so they can show that, yeah, they were engaged. That was very popular. And men also wore jewelry, mostly ring, which was like a wax stamp. So if they want to wax seal a document, they had their ring and they just stamp it with their ring and wax seal, which was very interesting. They found lots of these type of ring, wax seal rings in Roman baths around UK also, so that's how we know they did that. They are also in the museums around in UK.
Матери из более богатых влиятельных семей имели больше свободы, чем у бедных семей. Они могли владеть собственностью и вести свой бизнес. Они могли нанимать рабов для работы по дому. Таким образом, у них было свободное время для изучения искусства и литературы, а также для развлечений. Небогатые женщины обычно работали в семейном бизнесе и занимались домашним хозяйством.
What we have in this case is a collection of Roman jewellery, and mainly what we have are fibula, brooches. The Romans don't have buttons or zips, so they hold their clothes together with pins and brooches. And these, in this corner, these three particularly are quite striking. It's basically a safety pin. And it just holds clothes together. The interesting thing is they show the way that fashion changes. And so, for example, at the end of Roman Britain, the brooches that people are wearing and the belt buckles that people are wearing tells us a lot about who they are and where they have come from. In late Roman Britain, there are a lot of Germanic military brooches and belt buckles. But these are often found in contexts that are not military, which means that ordinary people are seeing these styles of decoration and copying them or wearing them themselves. One other thing I particularly love here are these key rings. They are rings that are also keys, so key rings and the little bangles. But mostly, as I say, the brooches we have here, it's basically a safety pin. That's the safety pin style. There is another kind of brooch which I can show you a copy of. I'll go and get it in a moment. Of the other style of Roman brooch, which is more like a pin, as opposed to a safety pin like these, where unlike a modern safety pin, if you like. But I'll get a copy of one now for you. This is called a penannular brooch. So this is a copy. It's not an original, okay, but it's the one that I wear. And just to show you how it goes on. Of course, now that I'm doing it in front of somebody, I've completely forgotten how to put it on. But it basically goes on like that, so that holds it. And then, see, here is my cloak. And if it's raining, I have my hood as well. So there we go. So this is the oldest form of belt brooch that you'll find. It's a standard form that goes right back before the Romans and is being used after. And it's a very simple, as I say, it's a very simple, basic design, and it holds like that. Oops. And like that. And then it just pushes through, like so. Oops. There we go. It's because I'm doing it in front of somebody. It doesn't work now. There we are. And so that's how it looks.
Большую часть одежды, которую носили в Древнем Риме, была из шерсти. Шерстяные ткани производились по всей Италии. Многие богатые римляне могли ткать дома ткань. Помимо шерсти, более богатые семьи могли носить одежду из египетского льна, индийского хлопка или китайского шелка. Какое-то время шелк был настолько популярен и настолько дорог, что римский сенат опасался, что торговля шелком обанкротит Рим. Римляне импортировали самые разные материалы – говядину, кукурузу, посуду, железо, свинец, кожу, мрамор, оливковое масло, духи, пурпурный краситель, шелк, серебро, специи, древесину, олово и вино. Основными торговыми партнерами были Испания, Франция, Ближний Восток и Северная Африка. Британия экспортировала свинец, шерстяные изделия и олово. Британские торговцы полагались на римлян в обеспечении безопасности империи.
Roman pottery was produced in enormous quantities. It was used for cooking and as a tableware. Terra sigillata was of red color because it had a red glaze which was applied on the clay before firing. Then it was fired. It had signatures which was stamped in the bottom of the pot or dish. This pottery was having relief or was engraved. It wasn't painted. It was based on Greek pottery, but Greek pottery was completely different because Greek pottery was painted with different colors, and this was one color with one color and not painted. Besides tableware, there were also pots designed for cooking and food preparation, storage, transport, and other purposes. Amphors were used during Roman times to transport food for a long and short distances. The content was generally liquid. It could be wine, olive oil, or garum, which was a popular fish sauce. These amphoras had a cylindrical body and long neck, and usually handles, which were very important. They were used for transporting for long distances in ship, and they used to have a spike bottom, so when the liquid was poured, could be handled with the handles and with the spike bottom to empty them. Once the amphora was completed, the interior was treated with resin to ensure that it's not leaking, because it was carrying liquid. Most expensive pottery tended to use relief decoration, usually molded rather than color. Fired clay or terracotta was also widely employed in the Roman period for architectural purposes, as for structural bricks or tiles. Also, it was used for lamps, as artificial lighting was commonplace in Roman, and candles were too expensive, made from beeswax or tallow. So the cheapest means of lighting was to use special clay produced lamps filled with oil. Italian styles exerted much less influence across the Europe in terracotta figurines and statues than in pottery vessels. Two manufactured materials were of great importance in Roman architecture, which was fired clay and concrete. These materials were used in buildings all over the Roman Empire and in many areas. They fell out of use again after the Roman period and only to be rediscovered centuries later.
Римлянам так и не удалось подчинить всю Британию. Им всегда приходилось поддерживать значительное военное присутствие, чтобы контролировать угрозу со стороны непокоренных племен. Но большинство людей на юге Британии остались верны римскому порядку и дисциплине. Города впервые появились по всей стране, включая Йорк, Честер, Сент-Олбанс, Бад, Линкольн, Глостер и Колчестер. Все эти крупные центры до сих пор связаны с системой римских военных дорог, расходящихся от Большого лондонского порта, таких как Эрмин-стрит, Уотлинг-стрит и Фосс-Уэй.
There are people who become Romanized at the time. So some of the Britons realise it's better to get on with them rather than to try and fight against them because they haven't got the organisation the same as the Romans have. And it was a relatively short period of time that they were here, and then they got recalled back to Rome because they were having troubles in Rome itself and they needed all the troops back. So I think if you think of the towns, some of the big towns, you won't go that far wrong if you kind of think of how Rome is, metropolitan, sort of busy, so cities rather than here. We're, as I say, out in the countryside. So that, the houses would have been much grander than we're used to seeing. They would have had running water, which they'd put in. Got the slaves working for them. They would have dressed much better than the Britons did. They would have stayed with their togas, but again, there's evidence that they started to think about wearing trousers and things because it was so much colder here than in Rome.
Дороги также позволяли распространять римские предметы роскоши, такие как специи, вино и стекло, привезенные из других регионов империи. Вероятно, что романизация Британии затронула в основном только богатых. Эта аристократия могла повысить статус за счет принятия римских обычаев, например, таких как посещение бань. Подавляющее большинство населения останется относительно нетронутым римской цивилизацией, живя за счет земли и зарабатывая себе на жизнь.
So effectively, the tribes, they sort of merged and mingled with the tribes, the Celtic tribes, and became allied to them. And at one time they hadn't been allowed to marry or sort of have relations with the Celtic tribes, but that order was rescinded. I think it was under Hadrian that the order, Emperor Hadrian, that order was rescinded, so they could effectively marry into the Celtic tribes. So then you had the Romano-British evolving, and they would to build palaces. Villas really we would prefer to, and many of these are actually seen today. If you find the mosaic flooring, like a fish guard, that's a place you can go to. You can see. But there's another one in Kent, quite close to where we have the lavender fields in Kent. As a Roman, mosaic. And St Albans, of course. St Albans, used to be there's a lot of Roman remains there, and fantastic mosaics. So they're famous for their mosaics, of course. But the Romano-British would copy these as they're really taken from the Roman example when Roman generals were being controlled. But they're perhaps a little cruder, not quite so refined. But at any rate, the Romans.
После ухода римлян в стране начался беспорядок и хаос. Коренные племена и иностранные захватчики сражались друг с другом за власть. Многие римские города в Британии рухнули, когда люди вернулись к жизни в сельской местности. Но даже после того, как они ушли, римские постройки сохранились по всей стране. Даже слово «Британия» произошло от римлян, когда Клавдий Птоломей в своем труде «Альмагест» назвал большой остров Большой Британией.